Hi, welcome today. Thank you for joining us for our first of our DE music sessions. We're posing the big question today of whether to use a PA system or not to use a PA system for your music practical HSC exam, especially with the considerations for distance education students. So first, let me introduce, I have two guests with me today. My name is Sharon McKay and I am the Head Teacher Creative and Performing Arts at Southern Cross School of Distance Ed. I also have two other expert, highly qualified professional musicians and high school music teachers with me. I have Isaac Frankham and I have Steve McLeod. So let's just start a little bit, just a couple of points about yourselves. So what's your experience in the music industry, Isaac?
Yes, I've been playing music, gigging music for maybe like 15 years now, doing like solo gigs or band gigs, setting up equipment, trying to make it a good experience for everyone listening and working out the problems that come along. Pretty much every gig you've got to work out some sort of problem, whether that's a sound problem or a venue problem or something like that.
What's your main instruments too that you specialise in, Isaac?
Yeah, bass is my main instrument, but I often find myself playing guitar for solo sort of stuff.
And singing too, don't you?
As well, yeah.
And drums occasionally?
If I'm lucky.
Yes. Now you also run, as well as being a gigging musician, with your own gigs, with your own band. You do session work with other bands and you also run open mic nights at various venues too on the North Coast, don't you?
Yeah, we do an open mic night, and that's a really good opportunity for people of varying skills and varying egos to play together and learn from each other. And as long as everyone has a really great attitude, it can be a really enjoyable time. But that highlights some of the issues that you can have with sound, particularly, and working out, making sure that all runs really smoothly.
Yeah. And our second guest that is in today is Steve McLeod. Now, he has extensive experience in the music industry as well as being a high school music teacher. So, Steve, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in the music industry?
Yeah, well, I've been playing quite a few years and doing various jobs with different bands and ensembles and from classical to country, reggae, blues, rock, old time even, a fairly extensive repertoire of music that I've played. I'm still playing in various setups these days, from a solo to duo to 4 or 5 piece bands up to 10 and 13 piece bands. Now those big bands usually require reading on the spot, so that's a good skill I've learnt. And I've gone from playing gigs to recording to even TV performances, etc. So I've done quite a bit over the years.
So as you can see today, our two guests are industry professionals that are also music teachers, but they know the tricks of the trade with audio and sound. They know the pitfalls to be aware of when setting up audio and sound. And they're going to give us some good insight today, coming from a perspective of education for your HSC practical music exam for performance, of things to consider and pitfalls. So we're going to put the question out there. So I'm going to go to Steve first. What would be a situation where you would say that it would be a good idea to use a PA system for their performance, for their examination?
Anything that involves small groups or even bigger groups, of course, but you've got to remember that the person being marked is the focal point.
Most definitely,
of the performance. So as far as using a PA, if they're doing rock gigs, I would suggest just miking guitar amps if it's guitar they're being performed on, or probably not even miking guitar amps. Definitely vocalists would need to go through a PA if there's other band instruments being played there, bass and drums and guitars, keyboards, etc. For guitarists, Usually these days, if they've got a reasonable guitar amp, that should be loud enough to convey what they need to put over in a band setting. Obviously, if they're playing solo electric guitar, and they have an amplifier, just use that.
Yeah, it should be enough, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
And Isaac, Steve, just summing that up, obviously the style of music you mentioned, first of all, if rock, the style of music needs to be a consideration of each of your songs. Remembering when you go into your HSC, you can actually choose to have one song with a PA and another one totally acoustic too. So the song choice, the style of the song, the instruments, the ensemble, and who it is in that ensemble, if you're with an ensemble that's actually getting marked, all need to come into consideration. So Isaac, what would be a perspective from you of who you think would need, or it might be a good idea to use a PA system in an examination situation?
Yeah, like Steve was saying, they've got if you've got instruments such as drums, bass and guitar, you're going to need, your vocalist is going to need to be heard over the top of those. So in that situation, you definitely want to use a PA, but it just depends. Like you could have a really, really quiet, acoustically set drums, bass and guitar, but you'd have to be so delicate with that. But there is benefits to not having a PA. I think we'll get into those in a sec, but I think any time that you want to reinforce the sound, but like Steve said, with keeping the focus on the person being examined, that's the most important person, and they need to be at the front of the mix so that you can hear them clearly above everyone else.
Most definitely. So what we're going to do, Isaac has alluded, we are going to go through the different viewpoints of and the different scenarios of what might be good for a PA, but we're also going to address in this podcast what might not be good to use a PA. So we're going to stick on this theme of what is good for use of PA, and we're going to go through some of the positive things and things that you can actually enhance your performance if you use that PA system correctly. Our first point I want to talk with both Steve and Isaac about is creating balance in a band. How can the PA be used as a positive influence for this? So, Steve?
Okay, now one of the most important things I've found over the years in any performance situation that involves using a PA, if the band has a good internal balance where everyone in the band hears what's going on and can hear each other clearly, that makes it so much easier if there's a sound engineer out the front doing the mixing.
Yeah.
If the levels aren't right, then things are going to be jumping up all over the way.
Yeah.
As far as an engineer's concerned, he's happy to set and forget pretty much. If you've got an internal balance, it's set and forget.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's unpack a little bit of what you've just said there, because there's some good points you've just raised. The first part we're going to unpack is to get an internal balance on the band. Now, I want to talk to you about when students are rehearsing for their HSC. Would you encourage them to use a PA every rehearsal or only when they're leading up to the examination?
If they have a vocalist or a quiet instrument, or like a flute or violins or strings or whatever, they might have to rehearse with that within the band. Otherwise, just for vocalists, if they had a vocal PA there, and again set the room. The as far as using a drum kit is concerned, the drum kit can usually be the loudest instrument within an ensemble. So set maximums to complement the other instruments within the ensemble from the drums. The drummer, as I say, is probably has the greatest dynamic range as far as an acoustic instrument is concerned. So that's got to be the thing. And the vocalist, if they're going through a vocal PA, and again, if that vocalist is the student being assessed, that should be the optimum point where people are complementing that vocalist's performance.
Yeah.
And hitting that internal balance, I say, is a very important thing, and rehearsing to do that is paramount, I think, in producing a good HSC performance.
Most definitely, and it applies to all musicians, not just HSC performance,
Exactly.
isn't it? The key is practice, and it's not just individual practice, it's practice with your ensemble well and truly in advance to your HSC performance, and bringing in those other layers that you may be needing in your band as well, or ensemble. Remember, it can be any style of music too, we're openly discussing here. There was a second thing that you mentioned in your point. So we had the internal balance. Well, you were then talking about the role of the sound engineer. Now, this is an interesting one in our HSC music exams. You have time to set up all the setup of the PA, the layout of your band, all needs to be done well in advance of your examiners even arriving. Now, this in itself can create stress, and we'll bring that in a separate point in later as we talk about things. How do we avoid that stress on the HSC morning, Isaac, of the actual making sure that PA is right to go the minute that you walk in that exam?
Yeah, well, like we were just talking about, practice. It's another thing to get right, and it's another piece of the puzzle. So you can't be doing it the first time on the morning, just before your exam. That's not the time to be working it out. You want to have done it at least like half a dozen times before on that particular PA, because every PA is a little bit different as well.
That's
So
very true.
practice is the key there, and if you can get into the room beforehand to set yourself up so that you're not setting anything up on the day is even more ideal, so that you don't have to think about the PA. The PA is just going to be there ready to go. That's great. But if not, make sure that you've practiced doing it a couple of times.
Yeah, we're talking the ideal setup too, because often in distance education, the venues might be hired just for the day of the examination. You've only got 2 weeks' notice, usually 2 to 3 weeks of when your exam actually is. So if you're booking rooms in your community, or your music teachers are helping to book those, and you're in a different town to your music teacher, which is most likely with the HSC in distance education, it's really important that you consider those things. And have you got practice? Who actually owns that gear? Does it belong to the venue, or do you have access to your home school if you're a single subject student? Or do you somehow have access to a musician's gear, or perhaps in your own family or your home? So there's a lot of parameters to be considered with a PA. Steve, you mentioned something about in an industry setting particularly, there's use of audio engineers. In your HSC, a student's HSC examination, the audio engineer cannot remain in the room during the examination. They can only do a sound check before. So if you don't have an audio engineer, what are some things that you would want to be sound checking, what we call a sound check, and how long should a sound check go for?
I've had sound checks that can go on for 45 minutes with various other bands.
And you don't want that in your HSC exam.
It sounds, yeah. That usually comes down to the engineer.
Yes.
But 1 or 2 songs should be maximum for an engineer to get this stuff together.
Yeah.
If he's not got it happening, then it's going to be a problem for the whole show.
So I would recommend, especially if your music teacher is not present with you to help you with all those levels prior to your exam, you might want to be looking at a realistic time frame of 2 hours before your exam, no less than 1 hour of those examiners arriving, of when you should be sound checked. Now also, when you get in the exam, the examiners will often give you some cues and say, do you want to do a sound check? Now Isaac, from your experience of seeing the teaching side as well, how long do you give for students to do that final sound check?
Yeah, just a couple of minutes. As someone that's teaching them, I'm not looking. I want the best sound that they can do, but I'm not there for a show. I'm there to mark the particular student. So it's not a chance for the band to do one last
Yes.
rehearsal.
Yes.
It's a chance for them just to get their levels, get comfortable, make sure they can hear each other, and it's not too loud for the examiner. That's a really important point. If it's too loud, you'll lose marks.
Yes.
It's important to have some volume because volume creates dynamic range. You can have the highs and the lows. If you don't have enough volume, then you've only got so much dynamic range to work in. But at the same time, you don't want to have too much volume and blowing everyone away. I've probably drifted off topic there a little bit.
No, it's still all relevant. It's still all relevant. I would even say when you enter your exam and the examiner says, often they may give you a cue of, do you need a minute to tune? Take note of their wording, a minute. So a sound check, once you enter that examination, should probably only be for about 8 bars of your music, not even a whole section, and most certainly not the whole song. The examiners are timetabled quite tightly, and it is expected when they arrive and sit down that you're ready to go. But they also give allowances because they know that strings on instruments, particularly guitars, if you happen to land a colder day, the strings will adjust and you need to tune, and you may need to set your sound levels. Just do that tiny little last check. But your sound engineer, whether it's a teacher, a parent, someone who knows something about music, just does that tiny last tweak. Then they're asked to leave the examination venue and you get on with your performance. Another section in considering whether to use a PA is it right for the space? So what sort of spaces have you men seen that are well suited to using a PA versus a space that is not well suited to using a PA?
Well, most of the venues that I play in are set up for live music. Hopefully the designers have had enough foresight to say, well, this is going to be an acoustic environment, and we don't want slabs of windows left, right and centre, or mirrored sections, etc. Carpeted floor, apart from the dance floor, of course. So it's really down to the venue to provide a decent room for you.
And we know in distance education that we do have a choice of where your venue is, that we can choose your home school. If you're a single subject student, you are allowed to use the closest school if you're a full-time distance education centre. You're also allowed to choose an alternative venue. I know we often choose the local conservatoriums that are available. You're also allowed to choose home. However, we tend to steer clear of that a little bit. But in some cases, there are some people that do have great music halls within their houses. So it's a good point, Steve, to be assessing the room that you're in for how many glass windows are there. What is the flooring on the floor? What's the flooring? Is there slabs of cement everywhere that's going to bounce sound around? So, Isaac, I'm going to ask you a similar question to that. So, what would you see as a place, and maybe the size of a room, that probably doesn't need a PA system? Depending on the style of music, obviously.
Yeah, always dependent on the style of music. But if you've got somewhere with some nice natural reverb, what I mean by natural reverb is if you go into a space and you clap your hands, you can hear an echo going on. That would be it could be a really nice space for a vocalist, a solo vocalist to sing just with an acoustic guitar accompaniment. But it could be a terrible place for a whole band with a PA. Yes. Because there's too much of that reverb. When I clap, you hear the sound bouncing around, and then you introduce a drum kit and you introduce a bass guitar and you introduce a PA, and there's too much sound, and it just sounds like, to the examiner, it sounds like a whole heap of mud. So that sort of space might be suitable just for a soloist.
Yeah, most definitely. And I know in previous years, Isaac, both you and I went to a venue that was in a person's home, and they did have a sound-designed music room, and the student that we had was a violinist with a piano player, and the sound in there was beautiful. There was no need for any miking of any instrument. So that's one example of a space that doesn't need it. The space we're doing this podcast in, it's a small space. It's a recording studio. Um, you probably would not do a drum exam in this room, but you may do a solo singing with a solo acoustic guitarist, maybe suited to this room. So those things are very important. So we've talked a bit about creating balance, of why it's good. We've talked a little bit about the space. We've talked about the role of an audio engineer, and then the specifics of how that goes for your examination. We also want to talk about the familiarity of the equipment. Isaac did mention that. That is something that I personally would recommend, that you know the equipment. There was a good point, Isaac, that you said about the music exam, and Steve has reiterated it too, about it being the student's exam. There's a saying that often music teachers might say to their students is the HSC music practical exam is the place for the best musicians to be supporting you, not necessarily your best friend in the room. So it's important to differentiate that too for your exam, that this exam is about you. It's about you showing your best that we're here to. So let's talk about some of the negatives of using a PA. We've alluded to a few of them, and how we get around those things, and which will lead us into the what if the decision to not use a PA is the right decision for you, and how we get around that, and how it streamlines things, how it makes things simpler in some ways, and what styles of music and instruments that option may suit as well. So, Steve, you've got a lot of thoughts on this from even in your rehearsals of not using a PA.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly benefits for that in the rehearsal situation. Regarding HSC, I think if you remember the KISS principle, keep it simple as possible, just to be projecting the student being assessed is, again, come back to it, the focal point. But also within a group setting, that with the band setting up a good internal balance and to be able to work in that way is a huge benefit to the performance.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And Isaac, when you're rehearsing with some of your bands, do you ever do just acoustic rehearsals?
We may do an acoustic rehearsal if we're working out some vocal parts, but generally if it's with other instruments, with the drums, we'll just have, say, a bass and a guitar that will come up to the level of the drums. The drums won't be mic'd up, and the vocal microphone will just have a vocal microphone to come up to the level of those other instruments. So we're not doing a full PA production. And that's really easy to do, just with a simple one-powered speaker that the microphone plugs into, and no one else. And it's that what Steve was talking about was so important, that internal balance where everyone in the group is listening to each other and adjusting their volume to fit in a mix. So everyone is in effect mixing.
To add to that, Isaac, the big bands that I'm playing with, our rehearsal, the only thing that's really amplified is the vocals. Apart from guitar, bass, and keyboards have their own amplifier, but all the brass, all the drums, they're just played acoustically. Yeah. So you obviously got to have an internal balance for that. And through 13 people, that takes a bit of work. Yes. But that's all down to the individual. Yeah. To be listening. Yeah. Listening to each other's performance.
Yeah, and that listening too, that carries over into your actual performance. If all the members in the band can listen at that higher level where you're mixing the band within each other, that will help you to actually perform better, because you're listening to the intricacies of what everyone else in the band is playing, and it will end up giving you a better performance.
Most definitely. It's those finer musician skills and the listening. I read somewhere, you would have to qualify this, but our brain uses around 15% of our capability of our hearing on most everyday occasions, but musicians are actually tapping into more of our brain's capacity to hear. So
superior.
Yeah. Look, we're better listeners, aren't we? So we can hear subtleties because we are trained from a young age, and that's part of the beauty of a musician, is we can hear things at a very fine level. But what the men is talking about too is an emotional response to music. It's part of teamwork. It's part of knowing the musicality of when to come down, when to come up, when to give someone else in the ensemble a go. All of this is really important. These are what we call the finer musician skills as well. If you can demonstrate that you and your ensemble have that in your HSC, but particularly you, it is going to pull you up in the marking criteria, because you're demonstrating a more professional level of musicality that's coming across.
Yeah, it's another good aspect of rehearsal too within an ensemble is to practice playing dynamically.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Steve.
Yeah, so that the whole band is going from PP to FF, or
Yeah,
from
purposely.
a whisper to a roar within a set period of time, and then come back down to the whisper again, and then take it up again.
That's a great rehearsal strategy for our students with their ensembles. Yeah, even individually.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you have any rehearsal tips, Isaac?
Yeah, there's so many things in a rehearsal. I think one of the most important things is not to mess around. You get in there and you start. You have a plan of what you want to get done, and then you start doing it. You don't just start noodling, playing with effects, learning the song. You shouldn't be learning the song at the rehearsal. The rehearsal is the time to rehearse the song. You should have learnt the song before you get there.
Yes.
Or everything should just be ready to go, so that you're not wasting time. That rehearsal time together is precious, and you want to get as many things done in that time as you can.
And I think too, as the student that is leading the ensemble, which we would assume is the student being examined, I think that's a good point, is set that expectation with your band members too, that can you please learn this song before we get to the rehearsal, because we're going to be ready to put this all together. And if an individual in your ensemble needs a little bit of help, then they need a private rehearsal with you at an appropriate time before getting with the whole ensemble. I think that's really time. So it's being respectful of people's time, being respectful of skill, and doing the work that is required to come out with a good musical outcome, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. Now, a point that Steve had raised in a conversation with me, and I've seen Isaac do it as well, is creating intimacy in a performance. This can be done beautifully with no PAs, can't it?
Yeah, definitely. To give you an example, I played here at school a couple of months ago, and where I was in a corner with an acoustic guitar and no microphone, no PA at all, and I had a couple of comments that people walking through the door were looking for the amplifiers to see, where's the sound coming from? Oh, it must be that person in the corner there. And the balance was fine.
Yes.
Yeah, so again, we're looking at a room positioning is a good thing.
Definitely.
Yeah, for that situation, I was in a corner.
Yes, which is often a musician's life, even in the professional gigging world, isn't it? That you're not on the front big stage like the big festivals. You're often in a stage that's the size of a postage stamp, trying to fit a band on, or yourself and maybe one other person. This is part of a musician's world in the industry of catering for all circumstances. However, in the section of your practical HSC music exam, there's options for the distance you can put the examiners. Sometimes when we do have a vocalist and an acoustic guitarist or just a piano player, we probably only put those examiners 2 to 4 metres away. Now, with COVID at the present moment, you might want to put them a little further for safety of everyone. But that can create a real intimacy in your performances. And remember, it is an exam. You still do need to communicate the content of your music as well. So that's something to think about as well. Now, what's another positive, Isaac, for maybe not using a PA?
Yeah, there's so much to think about on the day of your exam. And at the end of the day, the examiners are not marking on your ability to use a PA. The PA is a tool to help you convey your skills through your music. It's not the ends. So if you take that totally out of the equation, there's less things to go wrong. There's less things to work out, you can really focus on your performance and giving a dynamic performance and giving something that really conveys the emotional content. There's less stress. Stress is a really it's a really bad thing for so many performance instruments, especially for voice. It's not conducive to you giving a great performance. So if you've got the option to not use a PA and focus in on giving a great performance, then that's something to consider. Just because people use a PA doesn't mean that you have to use a PA.
That's correct. So that's in reiterating that, it was the PA is a tool. It's not the instrument. You are the performer. You could be the instrument if you're a vocalist, or your instrument. It can help eliminate stress if you don't use a PA, and it can also reduce the risk of things going wrong on the morning of your examination as well. Steve, what are some positives that you could think of reasons of not using a PA in your performance exams?
Pretty much what Isaac was saying, I think. You know, he's, apart from the physical aspect of having to lug a PA, depending on
That's a good
what
point.
theirs, that's another thing you don't have to worry about. And again, keep it simple. Use the KISS principle.
It's actually less people at your exam too, isn't it? It's you can just confidently walk in if you're just using backing tracks yourself, and we've got a series coming of videos to go through issues with that as well, positives and negatives. It is essentially, you want your examination day to be a day of celebration and a day of joy, of showing the examiners how hard you've worked for the last year or two and what you can do on your instrument. I totally agree with Isaac. You don't want to be going in stressed because of equipment. You don't want to do an injury like Steve saying you're lugging the equipment. This PA gear is heavy. So they're very real considerations, aren't they? A point I would flag, we were talking earlier, as we're often mentioning rock instruments, particularly in Music 1. I personally come from a piano and flute background, and all the way through my childhood, my training, performances I've done being a flautist, often I'm not needed to use a microphone because of the intimacy with a piano, also the venues that you're playing in as well. If I was doing an examination, I would most certainly not use a PA on a flute, unless you were doing some really contemporary like beatboxing flute piece where the microphone could actually help you get those popping noises more clearly articulated. But even then, that would bring issues. You would need a pop filter and all of that. So you're adding a layer of complexity in with those things as well. So we've discussed some positives and negatives. Steve, is there anything else you want to add for students in this overarching discussion?
Just getting back to your tuning issue.
Oh yes,
Okay.
tuning.
These days you can buy really, really good clip-on tuner for guitars and basses, stringed instruments and other types, very cheaply. Have them there. Have it hooked onto your guitar. It could be a foot pedal type tuner.
Yep.
The one I use is the clip-on.
Yeah.
So it's there whenever I need it.
And what do you use, Isaac, for your tuning?
I have bought several, because I lose the clip-on ones, so I've bought several clip-on ones and just stick one on each guitar, and then I've got a pedal one as well, just so that there's always a tuner.
That's a good point. You're saying one on each guitar that you have and you're performing with, so it's not...
there's a couple that I don't, but just the main ones. They've got an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar and a bass. They've all got a clip-on tuner on them, and then I use my pedal one as well. Yeah. Just so if something happens to my pedal one, I've got a clip-on one there, because it's the most... there's just really no excuse for not being in tune. Yeah. In between your songs, tune again. Yeah. And then once you've tuned them all, just have a quick check.
Tune again.
Just check it.
Can never tune too many times.
No, that's for sure.
I, as a flute player, piano player, I don't need a tuner, but there is one thing I would flag with pianos too. with a piano, it is a good thing to check the tuning of your piano many weeks ahead of your exam, because if you go in and play on an out-of-tune piano, there's nothing you can do to change that. So that you need to flag it to the school, to the venue owner, to the piano owner. Is this piano in tune? Could you get it tuned, please? And I would get it tuned at least 3 weeks before your examination. Most schools have it in their budget to be tuning the pianos regularly, particularly before exams. Another deficit of not checking the tuning of your piano, that it's actually in tune, we're talking acoustic ones, not electronic pianos obviously, is if you go in and you're being accompanied by a piano, it's going to be a lot harder to get your instrument in tune with the piano, and that is part of the marking parameters, is that your tuning is in tune with your ensemble. So I know as a flute player, it's you need that piano in tune so that you can get your flute in tune to it and so forth. The tuner I use as a wind player, I just have an app on my phone, and I think it cost $4.99 at the time, but I'm very happy with it. There are free apps around too for tuning, aren't there? Have you heard of any of them, Isaac or Steve?
Yeah, I had a free one for a while. I'm not sure what it was called. But yeah, there's some good free ones.
There are quite a few. I think even like the Fender apps and the Gibson apps for guitars have free tuners on them as well. So if you can't afford to buy, or you're isolated, or mum and dad won't let you use their credit card to buy something online and get it posted to you, if you have a digital device that can get an app, there are free ones that you can use. And I agree with Isaac, there is no excuse for being out of tune.
Definitely.
Yeah. So now, Isaac, do you have anything else to add to our conversation today?
Just when you go to perform, be confident. If you're not confident, pretend to be confident. There's so much conveyed through music that is confidence.
Yeah.
For vocalists, for instrumentalists, and if you take on that confidence and exude it through your performance, you will do better than if you think that you're not going to do good and then you're unsure and all of this. Maybe this is good, maybe it's not. No, you've done the practice, you've done the work. Now step up and exude confidence. And here I am. This is my song. I'm going to sing for you. I'm going to play for you. This is amazing.
And I'm going to have a good time doing it.
I'm going to have a good time doing it.
Yeah. You often find, Steve and Isaac, I assume you've seen this as well. I've seen it over many years of my teaching, that when a student who has done the required work and they know they've done their practice, it is normal to be a little bit nervous. But research actually shows that if you, someone says, how do you feel about this exam? If you actually say, I'm looking forward to it, it can actually improve your engagement in that exam and your performance by 15%. So when you're getting marked out of 20, that can give you an extra 1.5 marks just by going, I'm looking forward to this. And obviously I'm not a scientist, but it must do something in your brain and in your body and with the regulation of adrenaline, that adrenaline becomes a positive influence in your physical body rather than a negative. I know I have seen some students and even some professional musicians that are vomiting side stage before big gigs and exams, and you don't want to be in that position. So if you do your hard work, like Isaac says, you speak positively, you have a positive mind frame set of, I'm going in to show these examiners what I can do, is a really easy strategy that can be used. Now, on that, Isaac, what is usually the look on students' faces when they come out of these practical exams?
It's joy and relief and excitement and exhilaration. And they're usually smiling.
I would totally agree with that. There's almost a glowing quality, isn't there? Because it's a positive experience. And Steve, have you noticed similar things?
Yeah. If they know they've done well, it's a huge accomplishment.
Yes.
It really is.
And a good point with that for students is your markers are high school music teachers. They are there to support you. They're not ogres. They're not scary people. they're actually quite friendly, and they only want to see the best for you in this exam. And I guarantee they are looking forward. They sit down and they think, I wonder what we're going to hear from this student. Oh, may it be good. So, remember that is the mindset of your examiners. They are looking and wanting you to succeed. So, we hope this series of that we're making for you and this conversation has been valuable for you to consider whether to use a PA or not to use a PA, and just some little practical things in your examination with those considerations. So as we wrap this up, is there any final point that you would like to make to the students about this topic?
Put in the work, enjoy your work, and then have confidence that you know what you're doing.
Oh, that's great, isn't it?
Okay, because you will. If you put in the work, it's going to happen for you.
Yes.
And you'll be beaming as you come out.
Yes. And Isaac?
That's everything there.
Oh, there we go. We're going to run with that.
Times two that.
Times two.
Yeah.
So, look, we wish you all the best. This is the first of a series of resources that we are making for you. We are going to do a separate one on coping with COVID and the parameters, because often we saw last year in 2020 that ensembles were limited to one person and one accompanist and no page turner. So obviously the stuff we're talking about today is we made a lot of reference to ensembles. So we're just going to do a separate one that addresses the COVID if you get those limitations at any time. All right, go forth and practice.